Welcome back. This is Arunava Chaudhuri. You are live on my YouTube channel, Arunfoot, and I have a very special guest today in Ravi Puskur of FC Goa. Ravi put out a tweet last week after the Indian-Hong Kong match saying and speaking about that also the clubs themselves have to introspect, look at themselves, and also realize that they have been at fault inflating the salaries of the players and on the market. Ravi, first of all, thank you very, very much of taking time out of your busy schedule to talk to me. And I wanted to get a question out of the way because I think that's one question that every Indian football fan would like to ask you. Is Manolo Marquez returning to FC Goa? Is there any update? Is there any status on that?
Hi, Arunava. First off, thank you for having me. Pleasure to be having a chat with you. Okay, sure. I'll address the Manolo Marquez size question first. Right now, as of today, at the time of recording, Manolo is the coach of Indian football team. He does not have a contract with FC Goa. I have heard what every one of you have heard on from the president a couple of days ago, that there would be a decision made on the 29th after they've had a discussion with the executive committee. And then after that, we've been patient. We also want to understand. We'll be very honest. Manolo, at least from our experience, has been a fantastic coach. And I think that will be the same for the people that you speak to at Hyderabad and who's had a chance to work with him. Would anybody in Indian football turn down the chance to have Manolo Marquez as their head coach? I think only a fool would say no to that answer. So I think we don't want to be the fools who say no to that opportunity. So if the opportunity is present, we will definitely explore it. But as of right now, he's not the coach. After the 29th, if he's not the coach of India and there is an opportunity to bring him on board, we'll try to do that, of course.
All right. Thanks a lot for answering that question. Let's come to your tweet, which has received a lot of interest, a lot of traction. And you were somewhat the only one who's actually come out as in a top management position of a club in the Indian Super League or in the I-League to say, also we should take a little bit of blame. We need to introspect and we need to discuss, how we operate in this transfer market. How have the reactions been to you personally?
Yeah, I mean, we've had all sorts of responses line up in our inboxes. I've had people from state federations, other football clubs, fans in general, organizers of the league, possibly organizers of other competitions within the country, all respond. Yeah, everyone's got an opinion in the day and age of social media where everybody has an opinion, everybody wants to be heard and said. So yeah, I mean, there's been mixed reactions, but largely people are like, yes, we understand what you're saying, makes a lot of sense. But then my follow-up question is, then why aren't you speaking about it? And then it's met with a dull silence. So yeah, I think that sums up a little bit about how we are currently as an ecosystem.
How has it been internally at FC Goa? How have the owners have taken to it? Because of course, FC Goa has spent some time and effort. You yourself, other people as well within the club have built a certain youth structure. You've tried to build a certain grassroots. You have enabled young players to come through the system within the club. You've tried it to some extent, right? How's the owners taken to it that you've been so honest in your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, I can't pretend to say that I speak for them, but do they echo a similar sentiment in terms of what it is? Yes, and I don't think I'm alone in this, Arunava. I think there's lots of people in Indian football who feel this way. We're all limited, perhaps sometimes by our job descriptions and the contracts that we sign that might not allow us to say this. But ultimately, there is a point when, you do reach a saturation point where if you do not act, then you'd be equally complicit in the act. Right. So I think at some point we all need to have an opportunity where we put a mirror in front of ourselves and look at it and then be very honest with ourselves. And I've tried to do that. I do not speak on behalf of the owners. I just shared my individual reflections. And as of now, I've not been reprimanded for it. So I think my owners are not particularly dissatisfied with what I've said, because I don't think much of what I've said is incorrect or inaccurate.
But how does it change your strategy for this summer? Does it change your strategy at all? Are you trying to, for example, say, listen, I'm willing to pay 10, 20, maybe 25% less for players and try to get players? Or are you forced by the compulsion of the market to pay the current market rates, which are, as we all know, inflated?
Yeah. To be honest, Arunava, even before that tweet went out, our intention was always to never pay over the market price. We have actively taken steps internally to try and reduce the wage bill, quite simply because at the end of the day, the P&L is important. Yes, ambition is important, but we need to find that perfect balance between ambition and how much money we can afford to lose. Because as far as I know, my owners are not having their money grow on a tree that is sitting in their backyard. Therefore, we need to be prudent with that spending. And honestly, as a responsible football club, we need to do that, irrespective of what the owner's bank balance is or whatever. I think it's responsible of a football club to be able to operate within certain limits. And we've tried to do that. So for us, we've always taken a stance where we will pay a certain value that we think is worthy. But if it's not, then we will step out of the thing very politely, out of the conversation, because we can't afford it or because we don't think it makes prudent sense. So yes, we will spend a certain amount in the market. I don't think we are by any stretch of the imagination the most extravagant spenders in the market, but I also know that we are not the club that is the most miserly when it comes to spending, right? I think we're somewhere right in the middle amongst all the clubs. And our intention is to be there, but then make best use of our resources, try and put together a squad that can then compete with the very best.
One of the points that you also raised is in regard to the hunger of the Indian players. And this is, I think, something that all of us who've been in Indian football, following Indian football for a long time, I think one of the biggest strengths of the Indian team was always, if they're not the best, but at least they would fight, and
Yeah.
One of your players for me stands out in this, and that is Sandesh Jingan, right? I mean, I've had a lot of conversation with Sandesh over the years with him over this, since the young one. I saw him at United Sikkim in 2012 when he was playing for Baichung at the time. And you always had this hunger in him. Do you think there is a lack of hunger in the younger players to really, when they put the India shirt on, to fight for that India shirt? Is that a problem that you perceive to see? Because we see players playing for their club sides, playing decent for their club sides or even good for their club sides, but they seem to fail for the national team or not perform to that level in the national team?
I don't know whether there's a specific hunger for when they put on the national jersey. Whether they have the same. I just don't think that the aspiration to go to the national team is as strong as it would have been, say, 10-15 years ago. I think 10-15 years ago, or perhaps even much later than that as well, maybe even the last 5-6 years, I think the pinnacle of your career was considered when you get an opportunity to wear the national team jersey. I personally, at least in my conversations that I've heard, seen, and understood from the Indian ecosystem, the players no longer have that aspiration that, the ultimate dream is to make it to the national team. I think there are players who do. Of course, I do not speak of every single player in the market.
Yeah.
I do think, like you mentioned, I think Sandesh is a great example of somebody who wears that badge with a lot of pride and tries to represent it with the best of his capabilities. I don't think he's ever gone into a game half-hearted thinking, if something happens to me here, will that affect my next contract, or am I doing this so that I get a better offer from an ISL club? I think he's gone out there with a genuine pride of representing the country. But I don't know how many others would be able to do that, say hand on heart, say that, I am there. Because Sandesh always tells us, even if my leg is broken in the match, I will try to continue to play for as long as I can.
And he's done, Ravi, right? He's done it in the Asian Cup. He's picked up an ACL for India in a situation where maybe if he was clever and smart, he would have walked off a few minutes earlier, and maybe he would have not lost the most of 2024, right? So therefore, there is a physical example of Sandesh actually going more than 100%, and that's the thing. But why? I mean, you work with the players, you work with the teams, you see a lot of players, you interact with a lot of players. Why is that feeling so? You said wearing the India jersey, the pride seems to have gone down. I feel some players are just playing for the national team to just ensure that their value in the market stays the same. It's not like, again, let's keep on taking that Sandesh example. Sandesh wants to play for India. As long as he can walk, he will try to play for India. Why is that? What has changed in the mindset? What is that? Is it more about ISL contracts, ensuring my salary, ensuring my future, rather than realizing that, we can grow the ecosystem altogether if the Indian national team is successful?
I think it's a bit of that, where players are feeling like, okay, I need to, for me, I have heard conversation where a player is saying, if I make the national team, I unlock a 10 lakh bonus in my contract, right? Or if I play 5 matches for the national team, I unlock this incentive in my contract. It's never about, if I wear that national team jersey, then this is a moment of pride for me and my family for having represented X amount of billion people and gone out and done that, and to be able to say to my children and their children that, hey, at one point your father or your grandfather was a player of the Indian men's national team and played for the country at the highest level. The second factor, which I believe is also because there is an environment that needs to be created for people to perform. There needs to be a certain amount of camaraderie that needs to exist. There needs to be a certain amount of, you know what, if this guy next to me is not at his best, I have his back. And when I'm not at my best, I can trust this person to have my back. I don't know whether the environment is at that high level that it would require to be. Again, I'm speaking as an outsider. I do not sit in the national team meetings, or nor do I have the benefit of knowing what the inside conversations are on a day-to-day basis. But the general feedback that you get from players who are there, or possibly coaches who are there, which was the case for us where Manolo was there, etc., and everything, that desire to succeed and to look out for each other, I don't know whether that is there at the national team. I think it exists in a lot of club football, just because you spend your day in, day out with the teams, and it requires something a little bit more from each of these players to go out and say that, you know what, we're going to be here for 5, 10, 15 years, possibly representing the national team, and we need to create that environment. That high performance mentality, I don't think exists right now. And that is not just to blame the players, but it's also to everybody else that is part of that ecosystem, includes right from the very top to, you know, how things are planned, what sort of an environment is created, what they eat, where they eat, when are they supposed to report, who else is allowed to be a part of that camp. All of those things factor in, right? It takes very little to completely disrupt an ecosystem, but to build that ecosystem takes a lot of effort and planning into the minute detail. And I don't know whether that is there right now.
Yeah, and I think
but again,
one
this is
other
my
point.
opinion. I think this.
Sorry.
Sorry.
Please.
I was just saying that this is my opinion, of course. I will not say that this is a complete blind opinion. I have spoken to people. I'm not saying this with just, okay, I'm just throwing an opinion out in the air. But I do not pretend to know the entire story. But based on what I've heard, I think my indications are not too far off the mark.
And something which I hear again and again, travel seems to be also an issue, and how the national team travels, you know, not on direct routes, but via and all these things. And this is not a new problem. I've seen that myself in the past as well with the national team. Young players, ambition to be successful is, or are the good salaries in the ISL for 17, 18, 19-year-old boys also a problem, that these boys are getting too much money at a too young age and are getting reluctant to push themselves?
Absolutely. I mean, let's take Sandesh's example, since we started on the topic, and, you know, we've used him as a reference point, right? When did Sandesh really make it at a professional level? As in, like, when he was really an undisputed non-starter for his football club?
I would say Kerala Blasters ISL.
Yeah. So he was around, what, 23, 24, right? Maybe a little younger, maybe 22, right? Yeah. So, and did Sandesh earn top dollar right from day one when he was at Kerala Blasters? I don't think so. I think he was a rookie who was breaking out into the ecosystem. He had played for a few years in the I-League, of course. He got a big break in the Kerala Blasters backline, where I think he was the only non-foreign defender in season one, won the Emerging Player of the Year. And then after that, gradually his contracts grew, right, based on the output that he was giving to the team. And then he graduated to end up becoming, I think he was the captain of Kerala Blasters as well at a certain point, right? And he became essentially the face of Kerala Blasters towards the end of his time there, right? But this all happened at a point where Sandesh had to work hard. I think at the age of 17, 18, 19, he didn't have 10 ISL clubs, because they didn't exist at that point, lining up with an offer of 40 lakhs, 50 lakhs, 60 lakhs, because then the focus goes to the money rather than, okay, what have I done? ISL clubs, and we're equally complicit, we're all in a rat race to try and sign a player as quickly as possible. One, because the market is so expensive that once the player shows a little bit of potential, we're like, okay, now he's going to become so expensive, so then let's sign him before that itself. So we just want to try and accumulate as much as possible, which happens in global football. It's not a phenomenon that's only sort of, relevant to Indian ecosystem. It's a global phenomenon, sure. But at global phenomenon as well, there is some level of price control and some sort of appreciation of what you can expect from the player. Here, we're taking these players on. One, we do not have enough competition that they all get some playing minutes at all times or the other. Two, there is not enough of a robust system where there is a loans system, right? I mean, clubs in England and Spain and all have people who are dedicated to the job of just being a loans manager. They send out these recruits out on loan to other clubs, monitor their progress, and when they feel the time is right, then they're brought back into the ecosystem and then entrusted to the first team head coach and whatever. We do not have such extensive ecosystems in our network just yet. We don't have such a mature market, right? So then these players come in, they're making 10, 15, 20 lakhs right from day one at the age of 18, 19, 20, right? So then they're thinking, okay, maybe life is that easy, that, money is that simple. And then when you feel like, okay, you need to keep these players on board, It's no longer then the discussion is, hey, I've been in an ISL club for 3 years, so now do not pay me 20, 30. They're like, I must be worth something. So now the next number is 50, 60. Tomorrow, if a player comes to me and says, hey, listen, this is what my value is, and if I cross-examine him or his agent to understand how have you come to that value, there is no scientific method. I can always provide a scientific method for why I'm offering an extension at a certain value. I can say, look, you've played X amount of minutes. Based on that, my indication is that you've contributed X amount of goals. For me, a goal in the ISL is worth this much money because if I get this many goals, I'm earning this many points. Based on that, I'm possibly earning this much money in prize money. So I can reverse engineer the math and show it to a player very transparently. Will a player be able to tell me very transparently saying this? No, their thing is, no, my market value is such because this is what other clubs are saying. But other clubs are saying this because somebody else has told them. So see, no club ever loses money for saying a number out loud. If I want to take a player from Arunava's club tomorrow, and if I quote the player 50 lakh, I would have done nothing but disrupt your and the player's mentality, because I might not have to put an offer after that, because maybe Arunava might be forced to pay 40. But realistically, how do you know that I wanted to pay 50? I might just be disrupting you, right?
Yeah.
So in this opportunity to try and push each other ahead, we are ultimately inflating the prices of players, because, I mean, take a simple thing. Take any of these players, take them to any league in outside of India right now and ask for a fair value price on these players. Just ask them, you train with the team for 7 days and say, can you give me an offer for this player? What do you think the fair value would be? It would not be the 72, 80 odd lakh average that was. I mean, these numbers might not be very accurate, but I saw somebody compare the leagues between India, Uzbekistan, Thailand, all the top 10 Asian countries, and our average seems to be 70 to 80 lakhs apparently. I don't know how reliable this information is, but didn't look too far off the mark. But if you look at the same player, take him and put him in a different ecosystem, he would maybe get 1/3 of that.
If at all. That's also reality. I think that the value potential could be much lower. Because if I look at it at a European context, and there was just over the weekend, Bayern Munich versus Auckland City, and they were making the comparisons between the Germans and the New Zealanders, who are semi-pro, to some extent even amateur. They then said, listen, this is a team which most probably would be a 5th division team, an Oberliga team here in the German system. And then they were trying to compare, what could be the wages, because they actually have a job and on the other side play football. And that is, I think, the question of how do we evaluate the standards of our players, and what level can we take them? But the problem remains that because I think the player pool still is very, very limited, and you've got so many clubs that everyone is fighting, so to say, over the same players, and the players know. You mentioned the agents as well. They also know that, hey, there is a market for my players. And you mentioned that in your tweets, or a series of your tweets, you mentioned the agents as well. How did you mean that they are part of the problem?
Look, I mean, everybody's working for themselves in the Indian ecosystem. The clubs are represented by individuals who are supposed to go out there and bring the best quality to their squad, right? So, okay, we're driven by optics pressure from the fans, from the owners. The owners are not here to just participate. They want to compete. They want to compete for top honors. The fans doesn't want the football club to just be existing. Like, if I go out and tell a story tomorrow, Arunava, I'll tell you this, right? If I had finished, well, not me, but say had FC Goa finished in the bottom half of the table this year, and I had put the exact same set of tweets out, they would have said he's covering his tracks for what has been a failure of a season. I am able to have whatever little credit I might have in the ecosystem because my team finished second in the table last season, and we had a relatively decent season, and we finished with some sort of success by winning the Super Cup, right? The context that tweet could have had is completely different, because I have some built up this thing where nobody can say, oh, now because he's finished bottom, because perhaps the first people who would give me trouble for that would be our own fans. They're like, hold on a second, you have not been able to put together a half decent team because you've not invested in the squad, and now you're complaining about overinflation and all that because you're just trying to cover your tracks, right? So in that sense, for me, it's a big this thing about the pressure that we have. Now, who understands this better than most? The agents, right? They know A will fall over B to try and get ahead of them, and then that I can bring C into the mix if I have to, and just push the numbers up. I mean, ultimately, what does the agent do here, barring speak a few numbers? Does the agent then follow up with the player on a day-to-day basis to check how he's doing, etc.? Does the agent speak to the club to understand what they can do to improve the player's performance on a day-to-day basis? Absolutely not. It doesn't happen in 99.9% of the cases. You hear from the agent at 2 times of the year. When you need the player to be put in your club because there's an opportunity available, and 2, when the commission is there to be paid up. That's it. Other than that, you don't really hear much from them. It's never about what is my player doing and how much do the agents do for these players, right? Are they advising them on, what they need to be doing to improve themselves as footballers, improve themselves as individuals who have significant money in their bank accounts, but how do they invest and stuff? I don't think that happens. I will give you I will give you examples without naming players. I know of players who are playing for FC Goa who had agents at one point, and they were, we've scouted these players at the age of 17, 18 from I League, age tournaments, etc. and everything. We've brought them to Goa. They've trained with us for 5-6 years, and now they're beginning to break into the first team or have played in the first team. And then all of a sudden, when you have an opportunity to discuss with them, okay, you've broken in now, we're going to improve your terms, because we've seen that there's a future for you at this club. We think you're worth the investment. Yeah, but can you please speak to my agent? Sure, we'll speak to your agent. But wait, when did you get an agent? Oh, this is my agent. I've just signed him up for the last couple of months and stuff. Oh, fantastic. Have you ever met him? No. Did you know what he looks like? No. So you just know the name and a phone number. Yeah. I mean, for all it could be me on the other side with a different name and number saying, hey, I'm your agent. Can you take me? So that is the level of this thing, right? Because these players are not educated about, what does the agent bring to the table? What is he required to bring to the table? It's just there's one guy who's telling me I'll get you a 50 lakh offer in 48 hours from an ISL club if you sign with me. And the players are naive enough to believe that. And to be honest, I don't blame them. At 17, 18, somebody calls me and says the same thing to me or to you, you would do exactly the same thing. I would do exactly the same thing. Right?
And that is,
so,
yeah.
Yeah. So players would trust these agents right now more than they would the club that has found them, nourished them, and brought them to a certain level where they have some standing in Indian football.
Is that also this sort of distrust in the players? Is that, okay, the club actually doesn't have my best interest in mind? That some of them might have that mindset, that might be a problem? That they think that they need an agent so that the agent negotiates them a good deal, because as I said, you are trying to keep your wage bill as low as possible. The player wants the maximum that he can get. So, where do you meet? And that, I think, is in Indian context quite a difficult one, because as we all know, I think if everybody could reduce their wage bill by 20%, by 40%, even by 50%, most probably, it would be good for the sustainability or potential sustainability of teams, not only the ISL, but in the whole ecosystem. The same problem at their levels persists in the I League, I-League 2, I-League 3, and in the local leagues.
Yeah. No, I agree. Fair enough. It's a very valid point that the player must be thinking, hold on a second, the club will obviously look after their best interest to try and ensure that their numbers are as low as possible, because ultimately clubs are also looking at their P&Ls, and the owners also want to have the maximum amount of success at the least amount of investment, right? Of course, that's the magic, right? That's what everybody looks for. So that's fair enough. But also at the same time, do the players also understand, do they do this in-depth understanding of, okay, what does my agent have in his inventory right now? There could be a player who is, say, a goalkeeper for FC Goa, and somebody tell him saying, listen, I will take you to club B or C, but you then realize that, hold on a second, but the agent already has 2 of his other clients there as well. So how is he proposing to me that I go from A to B when he already has clients installed in B and C? That analysis does not happen because there's nobody advising them on this, right? The clubs can try, but then again, that distrust exists, saying that, okay, the agents are here to look after my well-being and so forth and all that, but nobody really does the math a little bit more. I think if a player is a little bit more conscious of that and start to think for themselves a little bit more rather than relying on the agent to indicate to them what their next step in their career would be, you would see some level of trust building between a club and a player as well. Clubs are, to be honest, I think most clubs offer themselves put their best foot forward. Sure, of course, there is a number that has to be negotiated and all that, but even before and after that, it's ultimately the clubs who are looking after them, right? We're the ones making sure that their lives are as comfortable as they can be. We're the ones who are ensuring that they're as well fed as they could be. We're the ones ensuring that when something happens to them medically, the first ones to look after them is the clubs, right? We will protect them because they're assets for us as well. So they need to understand the clubs look at them as assets and not just commodities that can be traded at will.
And this brings me to my final question, and which would be really a nice rounder of that. Do you think that I've seen that here in Germany, that when the German national team was in crisis, that the DFB as a federation went to the clubs, went to the Bundesliga, they worked together, worked on plans for development, how to create pathways. Should the AIFF try and work with the clubs together hand in hand? Because you guys not only pay the players, but the players are 80% of the season, or maybe 85% of the season with the club and not with the national team. Should this not go in hand? Because it should actually be in everyone's interest that the Indian national team is the ultimate team to represent India and also help us in the growth of Indian football.
Yeah, I think it indicates the failure of the system that you're even having to ask this question. Wonder whether this is even something that should be happening, because I think in most other countries this happens as a natural part of the process, right? If you look at any country in the world which is half decent at football, they're engaging with their football clubs because they are one of the bigger stakeholders in the ecosystem, but they all also work towards bettering the players in that country, right? I think India will succeed if there is a half decent ecosystem. The pie will be bigger for everybody if the Indian national football team is ranked even in the late 80s, early 70s, because then that means the country is doing something decently. We're competitive to a certain extent, which ultimately means one thing: more eyeballs. More eyeballs mean more investment from the corporates and from the government possibly as well. And that ultimately will lead to there being bigger money in the market. So if we are all happy being frogs in the well and competing and, bashing each other's chests and saying, hey, fantastic, we're doing a great job, we're not going to get too far. If you're willing to take that step and say, you know what, okay, let's take 2 steps back here, understand what is in front of us. If we want to grow as an ecosystem, we need to take a couple of hard decisions, which will then allow us to take 1 step back, but then 2 steps forward. Then we should be able to do that. And I think that will only happen if clubs engage with the thing. I mean, in my memory, I have been with FC Goa for, coming up to close to 9-10 years now. I've been there with them since almost the very beginning. 10 seasons I've been with them. I don't recall a meeting where the federation engaged with the football clubs as a collective, where there was a possible discussion on the table of what can we do to improve Indian football. And these are the clubs who I think over the past 10 years would have spent a cumulative amount of close to 2,500 crores into Indian football. But nobody's ever asked, what do you think is going wrong? And I'm not saying that we are the people who hold all the answers in the world. We are not people who will overnight convert your players into superstars. But I do think that we would have some understanding of the ground reality. And I think there is some valuable opinions that can be shared. I think there is enough people now who've seen the ecosystem and understand what could possibly help. But if the opinion is not sought, then we'll just keep running the same race, and then expecting for a different outcome sounds a little naive to me.
And I think that's, also a reality of Indian football, that I think a lot of us speak about each other, but don't speak with each other. I think that's, the biggest problem that we have, that we're not coming together as a collective and utilizing actually the knowledge which is there. I think there's a lot of knowledge in the
Absolutely.
ecosystem, and it needs to be shared and actually needs to be one common goal. And again, as you very correctly said, the national team success, I think it's everybody's success. And at the moment, Indian national team's failure is also everybody's failure. Ravi, I thank you for your time, for your honest answers as well. I think it's important to get this message out, that someone at least is talking about these things and addressing these things, because I think it's very important to have these conversations. And as always, guys, like, share, and subscribe. Arun Foot here on YouTube. Visit my other social medias, visit arunfoot.com. And I'll be back very soon with another interview. Thanks a lot. Good night. Bye.